We are now going to start our event. So welcome everybody to ISNLive, Navigating the Unexpected Crisis Management for International Schools. We're hosting this session at a time when crisis leadership feels especially real. Across parts of the Middle East, schools are experiencing rapid disruption to learning, staff mobility, and community well-being. Alongside this, global challenges such as cyber threats, safeguarding, and operational risk continue to grow. Crisis management is no longer occasional or theoretical, it is a core leadership capability. The ability to respond with clarity, make decisions under pressure, and communicate effectively is essential. Today's session is practical and grounded in real experience. You'll hear from international school leaders who have navigated significant disruption, sharing insights on early response, decision-making, and building long-term preparedness. We'd like to start today with a quick poll to kind of gain better understanding of what you are looking for from the session. So I will launch this now. So I'm just going to go back here and launch our first question. We want to ask you, what are you most looking to gain advice or support on today? So there's several options there for you to tick. This is multiple choice. If there's a few in there, you can select more than one. So is it responding effectively in the first hours of a crisis? Is it managing cyber risk and protecting school operations? Leading with clarity and confidence under pressure? Communicating with parents and staff? Or building long-term preparedness, not just those reactive plans? I'll leave this up for another 30 seconds, so just giving you a minute to put your thoughts in here, and then we can share these. Oh, thank you everyone for jumping on this so quickly. Oh, wonderful. Thank you. I'm just going to end the poll now and I can share these results with you. So we had 63% saying responding effectively in the first hours of a crisis, 26 about managing cyber risks and protecting school operations, 47% about leading with clarity and confidence under pressure, 51% communicating effectively with parents and staff during uncertainty, and then the biggest 75% building long-term preparedness, not just those reactive plans. Thank you everyone for putting those thoughts in there. I'm now going to hand over to our sponsor for this session, MSB, who's going to join us today with Pete Munford from Vantix. MSB, you may well know, is a coaching and coach education organisation fostering human-centred leadership in international schools. They work with over 400 heads and senior leaders worldwide, offering executive coaching and ICF-aligned accreditation pathways for educators. Welcome to Matt and Pete today.
Thanks very much.
Sorry, big intro from me.
Oh, I feel the need to take a deep breath. Well, it's delighted to be here, and a real pleasure for me because I get to invite along a friend of mine, which is Pete Munford at Vantix, and Vantix are good partners of MSB. And I think it's worth flagging that when we first talked about doing this session with ISN, well, let's say it was over a month ago, the world looked very differently, and we were talking about a range of risks that schools may or may not face. There was lots of discussion about COVID. And we started to plan what we might do. And obviously a lot's changed in that time and it feels more prescient than ever, which is probably why ISN have had, I think, over 500 registrations for this session. Pete and I just want to do this as a Q&A. Pete offers a really unique perspective on this world because in the nicest possible way, Pete is not from schools. He did go to school. He assures me he did go to school. But Pete's got a long background of working within British government, in resilience and in emergency response. He's worked in the Middle East. He's a fluent Arabic speaker, and he now runs a company that helps organisations better prepare for crises like this. Is that a fair description, Pete?
Yeah, that's right. Thanks, Matt. That's a very kind introduction. I'm very pleased to be here. I would say I came out of government service largely responding to crisis military intelligence work, and it was all very familiar. And when I went into businesses, I found that nobody did any of the things that we used to do in terms of preparation. And actually, quite a lot of the skills were lacking. The two groups I would say are a little bit different are teachers and doctors. And so I said to a group of doctors recently, you are the best place to respond to crisis. And maybe I'm now going to say to all the teachers that you are the best place to respond to crisis. I'm really pleased to be here, a group of people who are used to dealing with things going wrong when it really matters, and with lots of stakeholders who don't always do what they're told and act in unpredictable ways. So a lot of that feels like crisis, and you guys are very well placed to respond.
Thanks. So we've just got a few questions that Pete and I are going to explore, and then I know we're going to expand out into a Q&A. I guess given your perspective, Pete, that is not just schools, but is across lots of businesses, and prior to that, kind of working in British government. Um, I mean, the world is feeling quite scary, and
Yeah.
at quite a critical crossroads. And there was a bit that I think amongst all of us is thinking, how much longer do we move from crisis to crisis? What in your experience is kind of what is going on, and how do we keep going? Let's just start with that kind of
Yeah.
bigger picture
Well,
question.
well, thanks for the simple question to start off with. Very easy to answer that. I mean, the range of things that people want to talk to us about really is huge and overwhelming. We talk about cybersecurity, we're talking about people about AI, geopolitics, and just I think all of that adds up to quite a lot of overwhelm. And so we've kind of bracketed that in just kind of cognitive overwhelm. People have to deal with so much all the time, and you can be in this constant sense of panic. And so we kind of came into it thinking, well, firstly, just thinking about this stuff when it happens is no good. Just thinking about it once a year isn't any good. And if you're going to think about it more regularly, actually, you kind of get some benefit out of it. So I think if we can be positive about it, there is something to learn from thinking regularly about when things go wrong, what it looks like, and you come out of the end, as we all know, going through a trauma with some growth. And so there's some benefit to rehearsing that as well as going through it. So I have a good friend of mine who works in crisis in a very high threat environment, and he says he loves crisis. Crisis is when things are easy because everyone's pointing in the same direction and it's very clear what you have to do. And it's when you're not in crisis that things get hard and fuzzy and confusing. And so he loves it. Now he may have to deal with all that in years to come, but for the moment, yeah, I think what we try and take from that is there is some positive to be got from this, to be thinking about it and preparing for it.
And that's where I wanted to kind of focus our attention just for this first 10 minutes is around specifically the preparedness and how schools might go about that. And again, I say that with a big caveat that lots of schools, and I can see based on the demographics in the chat, and a lot of people are going through it at the moment and maybe would have liked this conversation 4 weeks ago. But there's also lots of people who are on the call that are not from the Middle East. So typically, how do you approach supporting organizations with crisis preparedness?
So, I mean, our biggest thing is to bring real experience into the room with people who might not have had it or might have it but haven't got the breadth or haven't got time to think about it. And the kind of best tool we think for that is a scenario exploration where you sit down and have not necessarily work through trying to predict what's going to happen, because no one's right about that. I don't think anybody was running a scenario 2 months ago that predicted this would be happening in the Middle East now. So it's less about prediction. It's more about looking at a situation from all angles. So we like to kind of do a bit of a freeze frame. Let's imagine this reasonable worst case scenario happened. How would that feel for everybody around the table? How would that feel for the teachers? How would that feel for the leadership staff? How would that feel for people running the estates? How would it feel for the kind of parent relationships, for the client management? How does that all look differently? And kind of dig into it. And pretty quickly, you start to spot people identifying things they're worried about or they want to do, and they then want to get out of the room and go and fix those things, and that's great. And so identifying those things, some hooks and practical things you can do, then enabling them to kind of go and fix them out of the room. And we like to do that regularly, because doing that once a year kind of isn't good enough, because the world is moving too fast. To try and spend the length of the meeting, 45 minutes on a regular basis, just bringing to life some real risks of what you would do. That's how we approach it.
And this is of interest to us because it's, fundamentally it sounds like it's about kind of human behaviors and how people relate to each other. So I'm kind of curious about, what maybe surprises teams when they go through an exercise such as this.
I mean, I think the human layer is it, right? Because I'm sure everybody in this call have got crisis plans, and you'll have business continuity plans, and you'll have things, and there'll be people right now who may say, actually, the crisis in the Middle East, what we did was we followed that plan to the letter, and it was exactly right. And absolutely well done if that is the case. 90% of cases, people don't even think to look at their playbooks. They don't think to follow the plans and they don't match the reality of the situation. So I think what people are surprised by is that gap between what feels like preparedness when you've sat down with a cup of tea and a pencil and a paper and thought stuff through, and the reality when it comes to it. And it's often the little things. Because if you run an exercise, you want to be thinking about grand strategy and big impactful things. You don't want to think about how will we actually speak to each other and how will we record the decisions and who actually will be in charge of calling the meeting and how that's the stuff that people come unstuck with like very, very quickly. It's the simple, boring stuff that you doesn't get on the news that you don't want to tell stories about afterwards, but that'll the thing that'll get you wrong. Yeah, I think that's probably a good thing to put to land on.
Yeah, and I can see Walter just asked in the chat, what do we actually mean by a tabletop exercise?
Yeah.
So, yeah, and I know this is something that schools, you could encourage schools to do themselves. What does that
Yeah.
actually look like? And again, I'm kind of curious about yeah, give me some examples if you don't mind.
Yeah, so there's a range of ways you can do it. So tabletop exercise is a table that an exercise you do sitting around a table. So you don't have to go outside or dress up or wear costumes or go and get sprayed with water or, live the kind of experience really. It's an imaginatory exercise. You sit around and you think, what if this happened? What if this then happened? What if that then happened? And sometimes some people want to do that for 6 hours, 7 hours, 2 days maybe and really explore an issue in all its angles and step through. Okay, it's 8 a.m. on day one. This has happened. It's 9 a.m. It's 10 a.m. And you can do that. At the other end of the scale, what we like to do is just take a 45-minute session and say, here is a situation, like a reasonable situation that we think might happen, and let's discuss it in all of its angles. But there's no technology, there's no virtual reality headsets. You don't need to go overboard. It's quite a simple process to set it up. The complexity is in the honesty in the room about how you will explore and like really being honest with yourself and others about what you will do if that happens and what the issues could be.
And some possible scenarios. I mean, we've obviously got one very obvious one, but what are the sort of things that typically a team would workshop, would tabletop?
Cybersecurity is often a really good one because it's one of those topics that could happen at any time to any organization at any moment and have any range of effect. So people are rightly worried about that all the time. All kinds of geopolitical issues and how that affects a company can be well known or it can be unexpected. There will be people affected right now in the Middle East. There'll be people affected by the Middle East conflict who are in China or who are in South America. It affects in different ways through supply chains. There's a kind of question of if you think about physical threats or infrastructure threats, power cuts. There'll be a process and a BCP, but there'll also be a human reaction to those events when it comes. So thinking through those as well. I know the process is in a book, what we do with the power cuts, but how am I going to feel about that? The process doesn't say I must immediately call my family, but that's what I'm going to do first. So maybe kind of live with that. So there's that kind of question of like how you find the common points between all those different scenarios and take the learning from one end to the other. I think that's important.
And I'm curious to know if there I don't want to call them mistakes, but do you see teams and again thinking about this being useful for leadership teams on this call or members of them, like do you see some kind of common kind of cul-de-sacs that people end up going down quite quickly into the process that would be useful for us to be aware of?
I mean, it's like detail can be the enemy here, particularly when we're working through something that hasn't happened and won't happen like that. So the temptation to say, well, we're considering what we do in this cyber attack, but actually that could never happen because we've got a software version that's 1.3 rather than and quickly you've lost half an hour discussing details that you don't care about. You might also get a lot of people who like to use the opportunity to demonstrate how good they are. And it's a great opportunity to get in front of senior leadership. And so you get showing off and kind of big behaviors that don't necessarily get there that can derail things. Or it might be about expectations or why you're doing it. I had one client who wanted us to help them simulate a China-Taiwan crisis, and they had a map that they wanted to help us look at troop movements and ship movements around. And like, we had to tell them that they're a retailer. They sell T-shirts and shoes in Europe. They don't need to be talking about guerrilla warfare in Taipei. That's not their business, but it's exciting. And that's what they wanted to talk about, the exciting, interesting things. And we had to tell them, no, you've got to think about, if there were a conflict like that, how will that affect the number of Chinese tourists coming to Europe? Like that's what you need to think about, not troop movements. So you've got to kind of get people focused on the right thing.
Thank you. I'm mindful of time. I guess my other question is just around the before and after and your experience of, what do you identify in teams that arrive at a tabletop exercise and maybe are able to map it out and respond and think about how they respond well. And I'm curious about how that reflects maybe what might have happened with that team or the existing dynamic in that team versus ones that handle it less well.
It's all about communication and trust. I think, 90%, I have invented that number, but something like 90% is about communication and trust and teamwork. So the two ways that works are, if you get a team that trusts each other and can communicate, that's a different experience. If you don't, then there's a learning there. Like, well, there's something to focus on about how you get better at communication, trust, leadership, and you use this as a springboard out of it. So much of it is about that. And that's why we can deal with any subject, because it's all really about those things. So that's a really important, a good overlap, I think, into the service that you provide in coaching.
And what do you see? What do you see teams learn when they go through such a process? And again, I guess this is true whether it's a fictional tabletop scenario, and I'd be fascinated to hear from some of our colleagues in a minute about what they're learning in the real world.
I think it's that gap between what is planning and what's compliance and what's actually being good at being prepared. They're different things. So planning is useful, but then plans actually won't survive. If you have to do things because your insurer says so, or your investor says so, or the law says so, you can comply with it, but it's not necessarily going to make you any better at responding. And so you need to identify that gap, like what's actually the difference, and where are there people pulling in different directions, and why are they doing it? And you can identify those issues in a 45-minute conversation. That might give you plenty of work to do. It'll help you understand where you need to focus.
Thanks. And just last question before I hand back to Claire. Just, if someone's listening today and kind of, I'm hoping resonates and thinks actually, that's something we need to start to build into what we do. What might be one thing that they could do to start to kind of improve their crisis readiness?
Well, I think don't overcomplicate it. Like, you can make this too complicated, or you can be simple. Just take it's a reasonable but worst case scenario you're worried about. Frame it, talk about it with the team, half an hour. If this happened, what would we wish we'd done last month? And then make 2-3 things, and then figure out, are they expensive or difficult to do? If not, let's just do them, and then repeat that, keep going.
Thanks, Pete. Really appreciate your perspective. Back to you, Claire.
Yeah, thank you. I guess, it is that kind of continuous kind of improvement, isn't it? And considering, I think that was a really great insight to leave us with is, what would we have wanted to have done 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, and how easy is it for us to put those plans in place? Thank you so much for delving into some of those issues, and that kind of teases up really nicely now for our panel discussion. So our panelists who are joining us today, I would like to start with just a very quick round of introduction so we can jump into our questions, but so we know who we're hearing from today. If we could start with just kind of name it and current role and where you are, that would be great. So could I ask, first of all, Ryan to start to kick us off?
Yeah, hi everyone, good evening. I'm Ryan Peet. I'm currently head of secondary at Taylor's International School, Puchong in Malaysia. And prior to that, most of, I guess, my crisis experience would be being principal in Shanghai from 2020 to 2025. So a lot of my talking today will be probably based on my experience around that.
Thank you, Ryan. And Beth?
Hi everyone, I'm Beth Jones. I'm currently head of a school in Guangzhou, head of ISA, and today I'm here at our school in Wuhan, which you may have heard of. Quite famous. And I'm Director of Education for the ISA International Group. So I'm here in our ISA school in Wuhan. And yeah, I've got quite a lot to say about COVID as well.
Yeah, thank you. And finally, Simon, who's joining us today as well.
Hello, everyone. My name's Simon Watson. I'm principal at St. Christopher's School here in Bahrain, one of the Gulf countries that's currently being attacked by Iran. So I have a few things to share too.
Yeah, thank you. It's shaping up to be a really thought-provoking session, so thank you to all of our speakers today. My first question is a very quick question for you all, just mindful of time, because I think we could get lost in this. But I wanted to ask you, from your perspective, what feels like the what feels most different about the risk landscape for international schools today compared to 3 to 5 years ago? If you've got kind of some initial thoughts around that, and we'll just move through.
I'm happy to add a few things here. To me, it feels a lot more intense, a lot more complex. It feels as if bombing has become normalized, and I'm aware that I'm in a country that's being bombed. But if you think about Gaza, you think about Lebanon, you think about Ukraine, and I suppose my concern is that this becomes the new norm. And international schools are going to find themselves in quite tricky situations. And I was interested to see that Peet had been working with a school in Taiwan, because that obviously is something that people are thinking about quite a lot, especially now in the current political climate. So that geopolitical one is a big one for me. The AI use in schools is a big risk, I think, for schools. Not only how we utilize it, but also how we make those ethical questions and how we keep it secure. And then the final one that I want to talk about is just really the social polarization that we're getting, and how schools are going to have to manage and deal with that particular issue, because I think that's just going to get more and more extreme. And I don't think that as leaders and as educators, we've quite tackled that in the way that we possibly should, and we're possibly going to have to in the future. So there's a few things there. I think that the final one would be the sort of the shortage of teachers. I think it's becoming, there's more and more international schools, and there are fewer and fewer teachers, it seems, coming on the scene. So that's another sort of heightened risk for international schools.
Yeah, thank you. Are there any
Yeah,
other?
if I could just add to that, Claire, I think one of the things that I've seen, I've taught internationally for over 25 years, and my observation at the moment of international teachers is that it used to be a very exciting opportunity for any of us to travel abroad and live in a new culture and country. And now people are really starting to think twice about what that really means to be an international teacher. It can be very frightening now. Since COVID, people have really started to wonder if it's the right thing to do. Like, it used to be that you just maybe missed somebody's wedding, or you couldn't be there when somebody at home was sick. There were disadvantages like that. But now it's a real crisis point where people are a lot more afraid to take that jump into an international teaching.
Yeah, thank you. Any other reflections before we move into our next
I think when I was preparing for this, I think a lot of the crisis is often self-made in schools as well. We go from crisis to crisis because we're dealing with many different human beings and many different stakeholders from many different places. So I think particularly in international schools, we can create our own, but those big, I guess, macro ones at the moment are probably, as we said before, about those definite geopolitical ones at the moment are really hanging over all of us, I feel.
Yeah, thank you. So we're going to delve into some of these today. So I'm just going to change our view up here so we can see everybody in the gallery. And so our first question now is for Peet, because we wanted to make the most of your experience and ask you about what are the most common cyber vulnerabilities you're currently seeing in international schools, and where may leaders be overconfident?
It's a question everyone worries about. The vulnerability, I think, is a little bit of a tricky question, because I think the critical thing to remember is a vulnerability could be anything. It could come from anywhere, and it will never be secure. Now, that's could be a worrying message. but I think it has to be the starting point. Like it really could come from anywhere, and you will never be fully secure. Some of the problems that happen is when people over rely on an expectation that they can be secure, and they require their security provider or their team or their IT team to give them lots of metrics and statistics and things that show improvement month on month, and they get better and better and better every time. That, I think, becomes the key vulnerability, because then you're expecting you're going to get to secure and then you can tick the box and you can stop worrying. And it forces people in that cybersecurity team to show that progress, to turning something green or making something 100 out of 100. And it's never going to happen. Like what you have to do is think about what you will do when it goes wrong. So you've got to have that kind of resilience mindset to cybersecurity just as much as anything else. It is something, when it does go wrong, it'll touch every part of the school, every part of the organization, potentially the school group, whoever's involved, individuals, families, the students. So it's systemic. And so I think the vulnerability is in expectation rather than it being a software challenge or a vulnerability thing. And I would really encourage that mindset, rather than thinking about a way they might get in, the vulnerability being in how we're going to respond and be confident and understand the kind of right thing to do and talk to each other.
Yeah, thank you, Pete. That leads us nicely into our next question, which was for Ryan. In regions currently experiencing geopolitical instability, schools are dealing with operational disruption alongside digital risks. How should leaders balance investment between cybersecurity, operational continuity, and other competing priorities?
I think in
Nice,
terms of the
easy question,
cybersecurity,
right?
yeah, easy
Yeah.
question. I think in terms of the cybersecurity, obviously there has to be a certain amount of investment, and I'm not sure if that would go up, or I don't know if that would go down in a time of like a scenario now in the Middle East. I don't know if you'd invest more or less in that, but I think at this point, like often, if there's a school closure, schools now go online. And often schools then go to different platforms, new things. They try new things. They go, this program's great. We'll give this a go whilst we're online. And actually, those are places where you might not be as secure as you might have been before. So it's good to have, I think, school groups that are of a larger nature, where there's 100 schools or 20 schools or so together, often have wide scale cybersecurity features and better knowledge between the schools and the countries. I think I would worry if I was a principal of a school that was just a standalone school with maybe one lead IT person to be able to manage that and know that. So I think it's about them working with different networks and then putting that investment into cybersecurity. I think obviously a big risk at a point like this would be the viability of the business as well. You might be seeing parents leaving the countries, parents wanting refunds because they're not getting school and things like that. I think there's a good case to argue for investment there, to maybe loyalty schemes for those parents to stay with you, pay now and get a cheaper rate or things like that. And it might not be investment, but it might not be taking as much income as you previously did before, because there's still going to be a day after the crisis. You still need to have those families there to be able to run a viable business. Then obviously you've got your staff and your students. Investing in them is obviously it'd obviously be a difficult time, particularly in the Middle East. So investing in their well-being, maybe external counselling services, these can still happen online for both staff and students. Yeah, but I think big risks, big risks at certain times need investment. But I guess it depends on the demographic of the school and where that's needed the most.
Thank you, Ryan. Like I said, it was a difficult question and lots to kind of include in there. Like I said, there's a lot of kind of competing issues there, and what to kind of prioritize is really difficult. Beth, our next question was for you. When a serious incident unfolds, whether a cyber attack, security threat, or sudden closure, what should a leadership team prioritize in the first hour?
I think the most important thing is that your communication is very open with your parents. that you've established those channels. So you need to have built really good communication systems so that you can contact everybody before any event like this happens. So we would try very much to establish the facts as much as possible first, because there's a lot of misinformation out there as well. So from multiple channels, multiple sources, we try to verify the information. And we would connect with our SLT, the head of operations, and also admissions and marketing. So the admissions, that of course they know the families and children very well as well, and the marketing to help us get the information out there that we want to promote. And as a leader, then it's really important that you stay neutral and set aside your emotions and send out a message from the school as soon as possible, even if it's just to say, we are aware that there has been an incident and we are working on it and we'll get back to you. And I would advise setting up a helpline straight away so that parents could message in with all their questions, because they might give you some ideas of their concerns that you haven't thought of as well. So it's important to have the channel both ways for your communication. So you can say that you're meeting and you'll advise them as soon as you can. And be very mindful in an international school of the different cultures, and the way that you're going to word your messaging is really key, I think, to retain the trust that you've already built with your families that are in your school. But as Pete mentioned before, most people initially will just want to call their families and make sure everybody's safe. And it's really important that we give the staff as well that support to be able to contact families and not expect them not to be affected by the crisis as well, really.
Yeah, thank you. Some really good thoughts in there, that kind of acknowledgement, like you said. So initially we understand that this is happening, and then that idea of a helpline as well, so that, like you said, you can better understand the issues that parents are experiencing. Yeah, some brilliant reflections. Thank you, Beth.
And could I just add, I think it's really important as well that people give messages and speak to each other without filtering it through AI, because it needs to sound and read genuine and authentic. And your parents are used to the way that you communicate with them. You can't suddenly become very AI'd in your communication. Yeah,
you're absolutely right. You need that kind of human relationship, that real relationship with your school body. Thank you so much. Ryan, our next question is for you. During a crisis, leaders are forced to make decisions quickly with incomplete information. How do you balance speed with good judgment?
I think ultimately, like any part of leadership, you probably need to trust your gut in this situation. You often know what the right answer is, and you can often be paralyzed by making that decision. But obviously, you need to know your place. Like, is this a decision you should make at this time? Is it a decision you can make? There's obviously government guidance. There'll be government assurances that are in place. Will it go against that? You'll have your board that you'll need to speak to. And some decisions are quick decisions, like you just asked Beth there the first hour, but some decisions, you've got a bit of time. So you can ask, you can go around the staff, you can call trusted staff, you can call potentially some trusted parents if you need to. But ultimately, trust your gut, I think, is the best one. You often know what's right, and in that situation, you know you should. If you've been in the school for a while, you should know your community too, so you'll know what the right answer is often. And sometimes you might need to speak to somebody to just give yourself that reassurance in that situation. You'd hope that you'd have a policy in place for these things, but it doesn't always work like that. Some of these things come up for policies. I'm sure there's not a policy at the moment in Bahrain. If drones start flying above you, that might not be in place. I know it's certainly not. There's not a policy for that at my school. So, I guess make those decisions, but obviously try and avoid any further risk. You don't want to go from one problem into another and be firefighting two problems at a time. But ultimately, I guess trust your gut. But I think what Matt and Pete said before about simulations are good as well. Simulate these environments. I wouldn't say just simulate them in your own school, but if you're part of any networks of schools in your area, put it on the agenda and simulate an environment. You can find you can get these simulations really quick on AI, and you can. We did one last week actually. We have an international schools group in Malaysia, and we did it using a dice, and it was fun. But we could have that conversation about what we do in a crisis where there was an issue on a school trip and it went different ways. And that was really good to discuss with different people from different schools to get you ideas of how you would deal with that. So certainly simulate those ideas with your own team, but do it externally as well if you get that opportunity. But you have to, if you've got those networks in your area, in your city or in your country, then make the most of that, I would suggest.
Yeah, thank you. Again, some great advice in there. It's such a balance about kind of rushing into something that, like you said, you'll know your school community and doing as much kind of planning and some of these simulation kind of exercises as well. Really powerful, really useful. This leads us really nicely into our next question, which is for Matt. So in high pressure situations, leaders often default to urgency over reflection. How can school leaders build the internal capacity and clarity needed to respond wisely, not just quickly, during a crisis?
Yeah, there's a lovely quote by Nancy Klein that we use a lot. I'll come back to, which is ease creates, urgency destroys. And it lives in our, I think that lives in our addiction as humans, rightly so, and particularly in schools where we are seen as solution providers. It's our need to be doing rather than being. And I think the question is how can teams build capacity? I think and Pete's talked a lot about it already. I think that's about how well a team commits to learning and understanding how they're going to be together. The do is the easy bit, right? We know what to do. We know what you need to communicate. You know the do, and we often rush to do, but we often neglect, understandably, the conversations around how we're going to be. And I think that's true of teams in all contexts, whether they're urgent contexts or not. If you're clear about how you behave and how you work together as a team, that's going to build sufficient capacity for you to then behave in the way that you've agreed, when there is a sense of urgency. And to echo Ryan, I mean, it's easy for me to say, but I suspect you almost always do have a bit more time than you think you do. And resisting the need to, we've got to get it out to parents. We often create a kind of saboteur voice, I think, of, there's a whole load of people waiting to hear about this, or there's a whole load of people waiting for me to take action. Everyone's watching. And truth is, not everyone's watching straight away. They will in time, but you probably have a bit more time than you think. So yeah, ease creates, urgency destroys. And I'm not an English teacher, but I did when we were thinking about this topic, just look up the etymology of crisis. And it's from the Greek word meaning turning point, decision, judgment, or separation. And I find that quite useful because crisis as a word doesn't feel very nice to me. It feels messy and chaotic. But actually, if you're framing it as it's just a turning point, it's just a decision, it's a separation from the direction in which we thought we were going. Okay, let's just be intentional and think about how we're going to be with each other as we go this way, even though we thought we were going that way.
Yeah, thank you. Some really good reflections there. I think of crisis and I think of panic, and that's absolutely not helpful. Like you said, taking that time to not be knee-jerk in terms of your responses and reflect and thinking about the wider system around this and how you work together, really important. Thank you, Matt. Simon, our next question is for you. So recent events in parts of the Middle East have forced some schools to pivot quickly between in-person learning and remote or hybrid models. What leadership systems or frameworks make that kind of rapid shift possible?
Thank you, Claire. It's not so much the leadership frameworks, but it's the leadership behaviors I think that you need to focus on. I think leaders need to remain calm. They need to provide routine. They need to be consistent. They need to understand, I think, as Beth has already said, that you're not going to have a full set of data in order to make decisions, and you need to be comfortable doing that. You have your crisis plan and management policies all in place, but when it actually happens, the reality is quite different. So in the case of Bahrain, I was saying before we started this that I think it was about 9:45, 9:50, Israel attacked Iran. And within 2 hours, bombs were falling in Bahrain. And we had students on a Saturday in school. So we have two different campuses. We had students participating in various events for exams on the senior campus, and in the junior campus we had lots of activities going. So we had to respond very quickly to that. I went to the senior campus and waited with all the students until they were collected. And then some other senior manager went to the junior campus. And that was our immediate response, was to make sure that the students were safe. Having done that, we then communicated clearly, consistently with the parents and the staff. And we moved, it happened on a Saturday, school begins on a Sunday. So we moved straight away into online teaching. Now, at this moment in time, the online teaching that we have been prepared for, because we would obviously have had COVID, but 3 times a year we do online teaching to keep the parents, keep the students, and keep the staff in sort of connected to that online teaching. But what we weren't prepared for was the fact that we were being bombed every 3 hours, and we're getting these huge alerts going off saying take cover, take cover, take cover. And how do you then adjust to online teaching? So during the first week, we really had we had a sort of teachers check in, you do independent work, you check out at the end of the lesson. But now it's settled down a little bit. We've got more online live teaching taking place virtually across the whole school, and people have become comfortable with what's happening. We don't have the same number of alerts taking place during the day, but we do have a few happening. And so people can respond to that, and we've responded in our online teaching. I think Ryan said before about keep it simple, and Pete said you have to keep it simple. We're trying nothing new in this scenario. We try the new things in the training that we do during the year, and I think it's really important to try and not introduce new systems into what you're doing during this crisis time. The live teaching, and you're dealing with issues like you've got some teachers in the country, you've got some teachers out of the country, you've got parents and students in different time zones, all pushing and pulling for different times for the teaching. And we meet on a daily basis as a leadership team, and we made the decision that we're going to have to just stick with the times that we have for the time being. We'll review those later, depending upon how things progress. But that's not an immediate decision that had to be made. We could delay that and just wait a little bit. One of the things that we did change was our holidays, and this was a major discussion that involved the board, it involved the senior leaders in the school, and that's because we have Eid coming up very soon. We then had 7 days in school followed by a spring break. What we decided to do is to make a major decision to change the spring break so it abutted Eid, and now we have essentially 2 weeks holiday coming back on the 5th. This was always going to be a difficult decision. Nobody knows what it's going to look like in 2 weeks' time, but based upon probabilities, we made that decision to move the holidays, and hopefully we're going to be in a better situation when we come back. We might be in exactly the same situation. We've caused a few issues, but we felt overall, when we prioritized the well-being of the staff, of the students, of the parents, and looking at the exam students, because those are the ones that we've put at a priority, that was the best decision to make. So it's not so much about sort of leadership frameworks, it's about leadership behaviors that I think you need to focus on.
Thank you, Simon. It's a really difficult situation, and it really grounds what's happening for your school at the moment for everybody here to kind of hear, what you have done in response to this. So thank you for sharing your experiences with everybody and some of those reflections about, what's possible and what you should prioritize, or what potentially you should prioritize in this kind of situation. Our next question is for Beth, and again, kind of looking at real world experience. We want to look back at the early days of the pandemic in China. What leadership decision turned out to be more important than you realised at the time?
I think before I address that, I just want to say how remarkable I think Simon is in that situation, and what a great example of a leader volunteering to talk about a crisis in public today when you're going through what you're going through at the time. And I really take my hat off to you, Simon. I think that's amazing. So back to your question, Claire. I think the decisions that were made during COVID, especially here in China, in Wuhan and in Guangzhou, where our schools are, Really, that's a time when the leadership needs to call on the board, because there's such big decisions for a head of school to take alone. And that's a great thing, like being part of a school group. It has been really important for us in any crisis, because we've got other heads of school that we can call on, and of course a lot more people with expertise to help us through any kind of crisis. So when COVID happened for us in China, because of course all over the world it was in different timeframes, many of our expat staff had gone home for the Chinese New Year, so they'd gone back to Europe or Australia, and they couldn't get back to China. And our board made the decision then to continue paying everybody the full salary, no matter where they were, and they really respected everybody's decision about whether they wanted to stay with family abroad or if they wanted to come back and feel safer here at that point. And that decision from our board impacted so much on the whole group, because it developed a great sense of loyalty from all the teachers that we were being looked after by the board. It wasn't just about the children or the fees being paid. They wanted the teachers to feel safe. So when we reopened, when the whole of COVID was finished, I really think, and please correct me if I'm wrong, all the other heads here, we had 100% staff on campus the first day we could possibly open. There was nobody left abroad, because everybody had felt really valued by being given that opportunity to stay outside and then come back when they were ready. And we all got back as soon as we could then, because that had built a lot of trust with our board. And, in other schools all over the world, there were people being let go because maybe they didn't have the resources to support that, and teachers not being able to be paid. And that was really tragic for people. It was a really big shift. And I'm sure the Middle East is going to have those problems now that we had during COVID. And anyone who's got the resources, they should just continue to pay their staff who've had to leave. Because in the long run, that's the best thing for everybody, really.
Yeah, thank you. Investing in your staff and making them feel valued. And like you said, and then seeing that repaid when everybody was then first day that they were able to come back, were then back in the school. And what a wonderful way to kind of to see that loyalty repaid to you. Thank you for sharing that experience, Beth. Just to open that up quickly, has anybody else had seemingly a small decision have a much bigger impact than expected? I can leave that with you for reflection, and we can come back to it if we have the time. We are low on time, so I'll leave that with you just for a moment, and potentially we could pick it up again at the end. I'll just jump now to our next question, which was for Simon again. So putting on more of this experience. So during regional crisis or security concerns, parents often seek immediate reassurance and information. How transparent should schools be whilst kind of still avoiding speculation or unnecessary alarm?
I think Peet talked about this before. It's really important to be transparent, but not to fill in any gaps that you don't know. I think certainly in the current crisis, most of the information that I have, the parents have anyway. I think there are things to do with examinations at the moment that we are communicating with the exam boards and the various professional bodies, and we're relaying that as we have it, but we're not promising anything because we can't promise anything. And it's just about making sure that you're factual, that you understand and empathize with the students and parents, and that you can anticipate those questions and put forward sort of responses to it, even if you don't have an answer. When you say, I think it's important to say when you don't know something, that you make sure you do that, as well as saying when you do know it. I avoid trying to predict what's going to happen. Nobody knows what's going to happen. I think if you start doing things like that, you're going to lose credibility. And so it's important to make sure that you're factual, that you're transparent, that you say when you know what you know, when you say what you don't know. You keep the messaging calm, you keep it reassuring. You sort of try to avoid making it too dull. Try to avoid to accept the situation you're in, but don't escalate it and catastrophize it, because that creates unease with the community, and it doesn't help the leadership if you do that. It doesn't help anybody. So those are the sort of very quick things that I'd like to share. I'm sure people can add a little bit more if they want.
Yeah, thank you. I think we've had a few points about kind of that how to respond to parents during crisis, and a few suggestions in there about kind of best practice around that. But yeah, being calm and, like I said, transparent and consistent, not trying to predict what's coming up. Yeah, thank you for sharing some of those additional thoughts with us. So we have a question then to kind of throw out to everybody. What is one lesson about crisis leadership that you only truly understood after experiencing a major disruption?
I'll have a go if that's all right, although not in a school subject. But the thing that struck me was how much I had silently assumed and had been thinking, and nobody knew I was thinking it, and nobody knew I was assuming it or expecting it. So I had in my mind, I have this relationship with an insurer, and that will help in this way. I will rely on this person, they will do this, but I'd never actually said it out loud, and I hadn't unpacked that. And when you come to do it in a crisis for the first time, you have to then build a new relationship with somebody they didn't know you silently constructed in your head, or know how to contact a partner and say, I've always thought you'd rely on me for this. And so it's kind of examining those hidden things and then getting at them early and just going to someone and say, look, just want to say, I'm going to rely on you if this happens, or calling the insurer when you're not in panic. I think that's the biggest thing.
Yeah, thank you, Pete. Are there any other examples that anyone wants to share?
It's just, oh, sorry, go on, Ryan.
Go on, Simon. Yours is probably more relevant. Yours is probably a better point than mine. Don't carry on.
I'm sure it's not. I think the biggest thing for me is creating this stability, the routines and the calmness in order to keep everybody in a sense that things will eventually be okay. I think the routines in this situation are so important for the students, no matter what age they are. And that's something that we're trying to do here at school. The one thing that the final thing I'd like to share is that whilst we plan for various crises and we model them, and we have walkie-talkies and we have radios, but the one thing that I'm uncertain of is how we'd really manage the school if we lost communication. And that's something that after this crisis, I will be going to and thinking about. We've contacted the embassies. We're not getting much back. Everyone talks about walkie-talkies and radios, but that doesn't really help. And I think one thing to do is to think, if you lost communication, if you lost energy, if you lost power, if there was no digital communication, how would you manage the school or manage the organization? And I think that's something that we need to reflect on here at St. Christopher's.
Yeah, I think even if you just lost email, it'd be almost catastrophic for a school, right? Never mind all the rest of the tech and digital communication. I guess I think what Beth said before about looking after your staff, the crisis isn't going to happen forever. You have to hope it'll pass over. And sometimes it's longer, sometimes it's shorter. COVID seems to go on forever. I hope the situation in the Middle East is a quick one, but they do pass over. And the way you look after your staff, which are the most important aspects of your school, is key, because you'll still need to carry on afterwards. What you don't want is your staff all to leave you and then you have a new crisis if you either can't run the school because you don't have enough teachers, or your parents leave and go to another school because you didn't look after your business isn't viable anymore. You still need to pay everybody. So looking after your staff, I think a super key element there, and how you do that, it might be different. It might be paying them more. They might appreciate that. You'll know your staff better than everyone else. It might be giving them the time. It might be letting them work from overseas if they can. Sometimes it's just about clear communication and empathizing with them. And you're never in a situation like this. I think one thing I learned is that you can't keep everybody happy. You could do everything for everybody and deliver amazing goods to everybody on a daily basis to keep them happy, but it might still not be enough because the external environment is bigger than you, and I think you just need to realize that.
Thank you so much for those thoughts and reflections. Were there any, I mean, we've got probably about 30 seconds if anybody
I
wants
just
to
add
jump
that I
in.
think, I think it captures it, but it's just, people, before people hear your strategy or even read it, they feel your presence. They don't follow your plans. I think it's just the theme of the whole discussion. They follow your presence, and Simon is oozing that, whether he knows it or not. This kind of calm presence being what his school and community need now more than a whole series of plan. And I'm sure that's been true of Ryan and true of Beth in their times as well. That people will just want your presence more than your plans or your strategy. And that seems to be the theme as I'm hearing it.
Mm. Yeah, thank you. A wonderful way to kind of wrap this up there, Matt. I'm just going to now drop the survey link into the chat. So here you can provide some feedback on our session today. You can opt in then to receive your certificate if you're an ISN member, and also then you can connect with our sponsor here as well. I know that quite a few of our panelists will need to drop out now, and attendees as well. If you needed to drop out now, we completely understand. The survey link is there, and we will email this out for all of those who registered and attended live today, if you missed that in the chat. If you are able to stay on for an additional 10 minutes, please do, because we've just had some questions in the Q&A, if you're happy to stay and answer these. But I understand, Simon, that you need to rush off, and Ryan, it's very late where you are at the moment, so that's completely understandable. And Beth, I'm not sure whether you have the time, but you might need to rush off. But if you are able to stay just for 5-10 minutes, I will leave that open to you. Honestly, please don't feel bad if you need to shoot off here.
And hang around, but no problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
Oh, thank you very much. So just a quick question we had here. So Khalid asks, how can schools prepare teachers to respond confidently to crisis that they're not trained for? Any ideas? Any kind of first thoughts?
I'm not sure that you can train teachers to respond to things that they haven't trained for, in the same way that you can't train leaders to respond in a war situation, for example. But it's making sure, as I said at the very beginning, that the behaviors that leaders demonstrate help support teachers through those situations. I'm speaking that because I don't have the sort of training myself. I'm sure there's probably is training out there, and I'd be really interested to hear about it. But personally, I think it's modeling the behaviors that you want teachers to model when they're teaching in that crisis.
Yeah,
I think sometimes there's the teachers, it's difficult because as leaders, there are sometimes things that you can't explain to the teachers. There's some maybe private information, or there are times when you have to keep something confidential, and you need to have built up that trust with your teachers beforehand. And it's difficult. The teachers just have to sometimes trust you and pass the message that you're asking them to without always fully understanding it. And that's difficult for teachers. But that is something that maybe they can talk about in meetings, about why sometimes there is a need to do that in a crisis in the school. And as long as your decisions are always what's in the best interest of the children, and everybody understands that the reason that you're keeping things quiet sometimes is because it's in the best interest of the children, then I would ask the teachers just to trust the leader is doing that.
Yeah, an important point also. It's not, teachers don't need to kind of take this on and think that they need to respond in a certain way. Almost, need to kind of look to your leadership team here. We have one more question. During a crisis, people tend to flee or run away from a situation. Is there a wiser in-between decision to make during a crisis or panicking situation? What might you suggest?
I might be able to give an example here. We had, going back to COVID in China, we had a situation in Shanghai in 2022 where there was a full lockdown, like a didn't leave your house lockdown. And I think we had, I think had 25 staff wanted to leave the country, wanted to leave the job fully. And this was May, and our new school year was August. And I think each of those people would have been with us for a couple of years already and been through previous lockdowns and things like that. But this was probably the worst. And I think it was about talking to them like as they were people, like they weren't going to get new jobs that were as good as what they had. They were going to struggle to get a job at all. And they liked being at the school, but they didn't like the situation. So it was about just having that conversation with them to say, is this a wise decision now? Is this going to last forever again? No. What's best for you? Like, it might be best for you to stay one more year and then go. What actually happened was half of those people did leave and we had to quickly replace them. But then the remaining half stayed, and the majority of that remaining half then left the following year. But it gave us more time to replace those people. But a lot of them appreciated that conversation, and I was desperate to keep the staff, of course. But they appreciated that conversation on a human level to say, is this the best? Is this the best thing for me at this moment? And for some of them it wasn't, and for some of them it was.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that kind of real experience there, and grounding that in a kind of real life scenario for us. I had one more question that came up in the chat, which was a really interesting one, where somebody asked, how do you redirect in the middle of a crisis when you realize that you might have taken the wrong decision or the wrong direction?
I would just say, I think we need to redirect. That's not working, let's change. I would have no problem saying that we didn't have all the information and now we've got some new information that have made us realise that we need to change what we're doing. I think that's fine. It's better to do that than carry on the wrong path.
Yeah, it also may not be a right decision at the time. Like, it was the right decision at the time. You made it for a reason. And there's a useful thing I sometimes do is to think, I'm making a decision now, just have like a half thought. If asked in a month's time why I did that, what would I say? And then at least that can help you think about it another way and just be confident in the decision that you make. But you've got to do what you can at the time.
Yeah, Claire, can I just go back to the previous question where somebody asked about fleeing, and I know that's very relevant for some people now, but I think how when Pete started this whole conversation and you said, Pete, I want to call my family first. I think that's the key for most people. Like, the bottom line is, no matter what's going on in the world, some people very much need to be at home with their families, and some people think that they need to stay so they can send money to support their families. Everybody has to make that decision, and as a leader, you have to respect that different people are at different times in their life. They have different priorities, and everybody needs to, first of all, take their own family into consideration. And schools that respect that are the successful schools, because we understand that our parents are taking their kids into consideration the most, right? So I think the whole situation that everybody's in always is, how is this affecting people's families and how can we support them? That has to be at the bottom of every crisis. That has to be what the goal is to support people with their families.
Yeah, thank you, Beth. Really sage advice. You're right. It really does come back to, thinking about who these individual staff members are as individuals. Thank you. We'll just have one more question jump in, and then I promise we can wrap this up. But a really interesting question from Jodie, who asked, asking the leaders directly, how likely is it that senior leaders will be able to recognise and admit that their skills in their usual role and their skills in an emergency or crisis situation may not be equal, and that sometimes someone else may be better placed? Is that a discussion that ever occurs?
It's an interesting question. I hadn't sort of really thought about it. You assume that you're taking on the roles that you have previously, and I think the one thing that I've done in this situation is I've made sure that we've had a team discussions around all the issues, and from responding to emails that staff have sent, so that we get a consistency in message. And I think that's really been helpful in this situation, where we discuss it, we think of the best response, we put a response together, we review the response, and then we've got a template going forward for various different decisions that have been made. And so as principal of the school, I've behaved differently to make sure that I've included everybody in all the decisions that we're making at this point in time. Sometimes you still have to make a decision, sometimes I have to involve the board, but it's been really different because of the situation. And I just wanted to come back to what one of the other questions as well about sort of the flight or fright. I think my only suggestion there is that when you feel that you want to flee, take a moment if it's safe to do so and just really reflect upon it. Don't make the decision when you think you want to flee. Just give yourself a little bit more time. And then it might be the same decision, but don't make it in that instant where you've said, right, I've had enough, if that's possible.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. That kind of comes back to what we said previously about, that responding in that first hour and trying to balance then the responses and whether to do something quickly, but also, yeah, thinking about what that response is and trying to get that correct balance, potentially that you have more time than you think, and taking a moment to reflect is really important. But thank you, everybody. We've answered all the questions that have come up in the Q&A here, and we've got through all of our questions here from our panel discussion. So we're going to wrap this up now, but thank you to all of our attendees. We had over 100 attendees join us today for the session. Thank you to all of our speakers and to MSB for sponsoring this session. And so we will follow up now with that survey link if anybody has missed that, so you can opt in for that certificate if you wish, and you can connect with Matt at MSB also. Thank you, everyone.